Okay. So cd into the project directory, running npm init -y for using all the defaults. So go ahead and do that. Okay, you're going to set up some basic files right away. So let's do the index HTML first. We're going to need webpack, so do a webpack.config file. And let's run some npm installs. Yep, React demo? Yeah, it's gone there. So npm install React, obviously. We have to install React DOM. I'm kind of just moving at sort of my pace. If there's any point where you just don't understand what's happening, like stop me. That's why I asked early on, who knows JavaScript, who's done React. But if you don't know what I'm doing, feel free to stop me. I'm just assuming you know. So the whole point of this is to learn, right? So if you're not clear on any of this, feel free to raise your hand, stop me.
What did you do after npm init?
Oh, npm init y, and then we created an index.html file and then a webpack.config.js file. So right now we have these two files, index and webpack.config.js. Okay?
Your Wi-Fi real quick is
Right behind you. Okay, let's npm install webpack. If you don't have webpack installed globally, you'll need to do that as well. Does anyone not know if they have webpack installed globally? Okay, so here's how you can just install it no matter what. We do sudo npm install -g webpack, like that. It's going to ask for your password. Put in your password and let it run. If you already have it, you don't need to do this. So. Okay. Now we need to install a series of Babel modules.
Wait, what do we install after React DOM?
Webpack, npm install -g webpack, like that, like this. Okay, and we have a couple more modules to go, and then we can get started. So we need to install Babel core. Babel is what's called a transpiler. Babel transpiles code from one version of JavaScript to another. In this case, we're going to use Babel to transpile what's called JSX into plain old JavaScript, as well as ES6 into ES5, the old school JavaScript. Why do we need to do that? Because not every browser can read ES6. It's pretty new. But ES5 is sort of the global old school standard. So just about every browser can read ES5. So we write our React in ES6, but then we transpile it into ES5 so that it's basically usable in every browser. That's the whole point of Babel, and that's why we're installing all these things. Good?
What's dash?
Oh, dev dependencies. So here, if I open up my package.json, here are my dependencies, React and React DOM, but these are called dev dependencies. What does that mean? These are simply tools that I'm going to use for development. We don't want the dev dependencies to be deployed to the server. Since we're not actually going to deploy this to a server, none of this is really necessary, the -d and the -s. It doesn't really matter because we're not deploying this. It's going to be a purely local project. However, I want you to understand these are the habits you want to build in proper React development. So for our purposes, we don't even need to really save any of this. But that would be a pretty weird project. Most projects you do this. Okay? So what do we just do? Babel core, so npm install -d Babel loader. Oh, I erased it too soon. Babel -loader, like that. So this is what I just typed, npm install -d Babel loader, like that. And then 2 more, Babel preset React. So go ahead and install that. And last but not least, npm install Babel preset ES 2015. I always do this one last because it takes the longest. So while this is running, I like to explain a few things. So what we're going to do while this runs, we're going to set up a Webpack config file, which will basically specify how to transpile our code. But I'm not going to have you write it. I'm going to have you copy and paste mine because typically whenever I do the Webpack config, I lose about half the people. And the Webpack isn't even the important part of all this. It's not really React development. Most of the Webpack, it is important, I want to be clear, but it's not React development. It's not why you came here is my point. All right, so the Webpack stuff, I'm just going to have you copy from one of my previous projects. I'll explain the code, but I'm not going to have you type it because like I said, this is where I lose about 40 to 50% of my people. And that's pointless. If you're going to get lost in the React stuff, not the Webpack stuff. So, okay, so here, go to my GitHub, velocity-360. If you click on my repositories, let's see, which one do we want to use? Let's do the first one, FS360. And click on the Webpack config.js and just copy and paste this in. So take all this, copy it, open up your project in Sublime or Atom or whatever you like to use, and paste the contents into your Webpack config. Just literally just copy and paste.
Sorry, can you?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of overkill here. I have some production scripts as well as development scripts. There's a bit more than necessary here. So we want to get rid of some of this production script right here. You see where it says plugins? Lines 13 down to 25. None of that's necessary for today. We don't need that. So we're going to get rid of all this. Everything I've just highlighted. See that? Just get rid of it because it's just overkill. Okay, we do have to make some changes though, which I'll explain once everyone's caught up.
What do we get rid of everything?
So here's what we have right now. Here's what you copied and pasted. Right. Everything I highlighted we're going to remove because we just don't need it. These are basically scripts that I use for production that we're not going to get that far today. So let's just get rid of all this. Okay, so we do have to make some changes here. Let me explain what's going on. So remember I said how Babel is a transpiler. What does that mean? It takes your code from one version of JavaScript to another version of JavaScript. That's what it does, right? So we have to specify, in Webpack, we specify where to find the written JavaScript, what we write. We tell it where to find it. That's called the entry point. Here's our code. Please take that code, transpile it, and put the results over here, the output. That's almost always called the bundle. Almost always, okay? So in other words, when we run our React code, we're going to run that file. Line 9 is what we run. That's the code that actually runs in our project. This is the code we write. You see the difference? This is going to be all ES6, JSX, non-valid JavaScript. So we have to transpile it into valid JavaScript and spit the results over here. Okay? However, we are going to make a couple changes because this project directory is for a different project. So in the entry point right here, line 6, we want the entry point to look like that. Okay. And in the output lines, just get rid of the public slash. And then we should be good to go. Okay. So once again, I want to be very clear about what's going on here because these two lines that we just changed, those lines will be changed regularly. Like you will have to go in and make changes pretty much on every single project, almost. But everything else is basically fixed. So that's why I don't want to spend too much time on all the stuff down here. You're going to basically use the same thing almost every time. But over here, what we're saying is our code that we write will be right here. That's called the entry point. We would like Webpack and Babel to find that code, take all of its contents, transpile it, and put the bundle over here. And this is what will run. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So you may notice then we got to write this stuff. Right, this code right now doesn't exist. Right, so now let's go ahead and write it. Our React code begins here. Okay, that's what you need to understand about this. So let's go ahead and get that started. So by now, the ES 2015 should be done. So let's go into our project, and we notice that the entry point is within a source directory. So we have to create that directory. So make dir src. So you see how we're creating the entry point? And then we cd into that. And then we now have to create a file called app.js, right? Because we're telling Webpack, hey, that's where it begins, so go find it. So touch app.js. So what did I do wrong? Touch app.js. So now we have our entry point. Okay, and before I forget, cd back to the root level directory. Go to your project, find the app.js file, open it up, and now we begin writing our React project. So we have to import some modules. So here we're importing the React library, obviously. We also need what's called a React DOM. And here we're going to specify our React class for the entry point. And right now it'll render nothing more than just some plain text. Very, very simple text just to indicate it's working or not. Okay. And at the very bottom we have to render the code. And that's it. We have our first React component. Thank you for coming. Have a good night. So right away, we're using a lot of things that regular JavaScript doesn't know about, like JSX. This is JSX code right here. This is all ES6, not ES5. So right away, none of this would run in a regular browser. We have to transpile this. Okay, let me know when you have this done. Rochelle, can you do me a favor? Can you just toss me one of those markers? Thanks. Okay. So now remember what I said. This code can't run. We have to transpile the code. Remember what does that for us is Webpack and Babel. So what we have to do is we have to open the terminal again. Open a new tab by doing Command T, and in here we're gonna run Webpack, which is very simple. We do Webpack -w like that, okay, just like that. And right here, I'm pretty sure at least 3 of you are gonna break. What's that?
I see the last line of
Yep.
the app.
So be prepared for your code to break here. Usually, at least half the people at this point make a mistake. Don't let it throw you off. This is an extremely typical experience. In fact, I probably made a mistake. So that's why, well, there's not why nothing, but my point is don't let that throw you off. So let's debug any mistakes. So who here has a bunch of, doesn't see this? Okay, so we have to debug. So if there's a mistake, you see a bunch of red, like this. Mistake, bad, right? This is bad. So generally speaking, the Webpack console gives you some indication of where the mistake is. So right here it says unterminated contents, line 14 in the app.js file. You see that? So it's telling you where to look. So right here in the app.js file, look on line 14, specifically column 23. Well, for me, that's not the spot, but generally speaking, where the Webpack console points you is somewhat close to where the mistake is. For us, there's only one file, so it's going to have to be here. But try to get used to reading these console logs because they happen a lot.
My error says output file name not configured.
So that means there must be a typo in the Webpack config. Now, if you did get this running, who did get this running? Okay, so a few people. Look at what happened in the project. A new directory was created right here with two new files, bundle and bundle.map. We didn't write those files. Those are transpiled code as per the instructions we specified in Webpack. Okay? So this code right here, these files right here were generated by Webpack and Babel. They created that for us because that's what we told it to do. Does that make sense? Entry point output. Okay? Question?
I don't. Yeah, mine didn't make that. It didn't show like red like an error. It just.
Okay, so you're in the wrong directory. So remember I said CD back to root level. So you want to CD up one level. So here, let me show you how it should look. Right here, you see where it says Google Maps.
Yeah.
Yours probably says SRC or
No, that was,
not Google
that was
Maps.
in the right. Yeah, I was in the right one.
Okay, then chances are your actual Webpack config file is somehow misconfigured. So it says file name not configured, right? So that means there's something wrong with the Webpack config. So if you collapse this index package, Webpack config, go here in your terminal and type in pwd. So yeah, so it doesn't say you're in the wrong directory. So it says React Meetup.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be in the Google Maps directory.
Oh,
So
okay.
you have to cd Google Maps.
All right, thank you.
Who has this working? Okay, so we almost have everyone.
So, I had an error, module not found, and I was up module left down.
So here, what that means is for some reason it's not picking this up. There's several ways that can happen, but it's not finding that module. So either you didn't import it, you mistyped it, any number of possibilities. In the worst case scenario, you can just re-import it. That's not a big deal. Just do npm install React down again. Okay.
What does the component do in React? Component code bases?
So a component is sort of the visual foundation of a React project. It's basically a visual component, literally. So in a React project, you build your UIs by putting together a bunch of components, kind of like piecing together Legos to build out your entire visual UI. So here on my project, that I'm basing this off of, what you're looking at is just a big mishmash of components. This is a component called the nav bar. This is a component called the map. This is a component called the post. All right, this is a component down here called I forget what I called it, but it's where you can register for notifications. Right, I'm just putting together components inside of a layout. And that's how React works. That's the fundamental paradigm of building out a React site. Okay, very different from pretty much anything else. It's very different from Ruby on Rails or jQuery development or even Angular. Angular is kind of close. They have directives. I don't know if you guys have done any Angular, but This is kind of like Angular directives, but way better, way faster, way more efficient, way smarter. Like you can maintain state much better than an Angular directive. So the closest I can think of is an Angular directive. I did a lot of Angular work for a couple of years too. So coming from the Angular world professionally, and now the React world professionally, there is no contest. React, this is like Usain Bolt versus me in a race. Right? That's the difference, right? And I'm not an athlete, so just to be clear, that's the difference. React just kills it in terms of how fast it is, how efficient, and just everything about it. That's why Angular 1 kind of tapped out, and they were like, we can't compete with this. We gotta get Angular 2, and they won't compete on that either. So, all right, so who's good to go? All right, excellent. Where were we? Okay, so now let's render this guy. Let's render this. So open up the index.html, and let's create some very basic HTML. Very, very primitive HTML. I'm not doing anything fancy here, just very basic stuff. Okay. Would it be funny if there are guys in the data science meetup right now wondering, what the hell how did I end up here? Guess I'll listen to neural networks now. NLP processing. Sounds exciting. All right, so here, this is what matters. The most important line is line 9. Look at what I'm importing, the bundle, right? Remember what I said? The transpiled code is the code we run. This is not the code we wrote. This is the code that was transpiled. That's the guy that actually runs the code. So we have to import the bundle. Okay, equally important, line 7. You see where it says div ID equals app? If you open up the app.js we wrote a few minutes ago, look at what it says on the last line, get element by ID app. So it's going to find that div with that specific ID, and then what React does is it finds that div, it takes over its contents, it takes over that div, and it will render whatever React code we have instead. That's the whole premise of React. That is how React does what it does. Okay, so now if we open up the project and open this guy up, we should see that. Everyone make sure you have that. So what have we done? We've successfully confirmed that our React code is interfacing with the actual DOM. We've rendered our code. So just getting something up and running can be a bit of a hassle, right? That's one of the biggest knocks against React. I don't particularly mind, but the point is this: it's not a beginner tool. It's not something I would teach just complete beginners. If you want to get into this, you got everything we just did. You got to do literally 50 times. You got to get to a point where this is not nearly part of the challenge. This is just how you start, right? This is like how you tie your shoes in the morning. That's how you start your day. And then you have your actual stuff you got to get to, like integrating Google Maps. So what I do in a lot of my courses, if this was an actual class, a paid class, what I'd be doing right now is I say, stop right here. Everyone do everything we just did again 5 more times. And that'll take us to lunch. That's how you get better at this. You guys see how I'm doing this literally without even thinking about it? Like I'm thinking about other stuff. That's not because I'm so good at it. That's because I've done it hundreds of times. That's the reason. So that means I don't have the cognitive overhead of trying to remember where to put webpack config. I don't even think about it. That means I can think about the actual challenges. How do I get the map on the screen? How do I interface with an API? How do I connect this to a third-party API? Those are the real challenges. Right? That's what you want to get to. So that's kind of how I go about my teaching. Just a quick aside on that. Who has this rendering? So we're down to 3. Yeah, I don't want it less than half getting this working. So let's get everyone together.
When you make a change, you have to run webpack again to rebuild it.
Yes and no. That's why I put this W right here.
Oh, it's watch.
Yep. But if it's not working, just run it again. It's not a big deal. Gotcha. Okay, cool. So again, who has this working? All right, we're over half. That's what matters. Okay, cool. Okay. Let's see. So the way we're going to set this up is we're going to have the map on the left side and a series of places on the right side. What this sort of demo project is going to do is going to search a list of places using the Foursquare API. I find that one to be easier than Google. So it's going to find a list of places by location using the Foursquare API. And then we're going to take that and render those places on the map via a series of pins. Okay? That's the objective of tonight. So the way it's going to look is map on the left, list on the right. So again, thinking from a React paradigm, think about where it said map on the left, places on the right. Those are 2 components I just described. So we want to write 2 components, one called map, another one called places. So part of the challenge here is just starting to think in React land rather than whatever web background you come from. So what we want to do, that, by the way, for me was the hardest transition. I'd done Angular on the web for about 2 years, and it's just a very different way of thinking. So undoing all my Angular thought process to switch over to React, in and of itself was very difficult. So let's see. So we cd to the source directory, and we make a new directory called components. Cd into that. And then we're going to create 2 components, one called map and one called places. Okay, and both of those components right now will be extremely primitive. They're just going to say map component, places component. So let's go ahead and do that. So open up the map component and then import the same modules. Actually, we don't need the React DOM, so we just need the React component right here. And then here we set up a very simple component, which does nothing more than render just some basic text. This is the map component. Okay. Okay, so here, you'll see that it's pretty much the same as the other one. With the one pretty important distinction is the bottom. You see where it says export default map rather than React DOM, because this component will not directly hit the DOM. It will not directly interface with the HTML. Only the entry point does that. Okay? So there's only one entry point. That's like the bridge between HTML world and React world. And they're like completely only connected by that one point. So here, instead of React DOM, we're exporting this so that we can take this code. React. Yep, come on in. We can take this component and put it inside of other components. Okay, we're going to nest the components. Got it? So this map component right here, we're going to import it inside the app.js. So you see here how we're importing the map into our app.js. Now we can use it like any other component. And you can roughly think of components as HTML tags. It's certainly not an exact translation, but for at the beginner stages, you can kind of think of it that way, and you're not far off.
Could you go back to the map?
Yep.
Map. Thank you.
Now, if you have this already, just basically rewrite this for the other component as well, places. Yeah,
Can
question?
you go back to like app.js file, please?
Why are you all set?
Yeah, I'll be good.
Okay, and then here we import it from the
Yeah.
components directory.
Right there, don't we have to do like the directory is source and then components?
No, it's already in the source directory. This file is already in the source directory. So to write it again would be redundant. It would actually break it. It would look for the source directory inside of the source directory. So it doesn't exist. And just to make sure everything works, if it worked, when you reload the page, you should now see that. And if you have that, do the same thing for the places component. It's basically the same process. So,
Actually, could you go back to the map.js?
yep. Okay. And take all this, put it in the places component just to give it some initial content, but make sure you change it from map to places, otherwise that's going to create some funky behavior. So just change the name of the component to places, that's all. So we're just setting up some very primitive components right now. Okay. And then import that in the app.js as well, just to make sure all of this works. And then render that. And once we have that, 1, 2, 3, we're now ready to build out these components. Does that make sense? So always start simple, by the way. This isn't something I'm doing for the sake of a demo. This is how I actually start my project. Start simple. I don't know how many of you guys are like beginners, but one of the biggest beginner mistakes I see is people try and do too much. You try and do too much, you get lost, and you make 20 mistakes along the way, and debugging that becomes a nightmare. So you want to start simple here, because if I make a mistake here, there aren't too many places where I could have messed it up. I'm going to find it right away. Does that make sense? Keep it simple, get it working first, and then let's start building it out. Okay? So how are we so far? So, yep.
Yeah, sorry to drag you back, but so all you did was just create the 3 components, not the 2 maps and places?
Yeah, and there are 3 components, the app component as well. So we embedded 2 of them inside the
Inside
app
the app
component. Mm-hmm. So you see now how I was saying earlier, React UI is basically just a combination of components. We're starting to see that come together here. We're just bringing components together to create our UI. That's how React development is done. In today's case, we're only going to use these 2 components. So now that we have the components properly connected, now we're going to build them out. We're going to flesh out the UI. So who's ready to go? Who has this working? Okay. If you don't have it working, take a few more minutes. Take your time. I want to make sure that we're all together. By working, I mean this. You should see this.
Could you go back to like the map and the places in the JS file? Please.
Yeah.
Okay, so components, if you think about them, they're basically visual building blocks, right? They're units of code that represents the visual building block that we can reuse in different spots, right? So if you look at my website, any of my websites, you're seeing a bunch of components. Like this is a component called nav. You see that? And if I navigate to another page, like let's say I go here, I'm on a different page now, but I'm using the same component, right? So I'm reusing components, right? That's called modularity. These components are modular. They can be reused. That's actually why you want. That's what makes it so powerful. You can reuse components. React, being what it is, it's even more modular. You can reuse components beyond the scope of just your project. What that means is you can create your own components for basically public usage, right? You can create your own components that anyone could use in their projects. You can open source components. Does that make sense? So that's a very powerful feature of React. So who here is familiar with the NPM ecosystem, Node Package Manager, where basically people open source their modules and we import them. We're using it today, all those NPM installs. And now we're basically importing units of functionality from the NPM directory, right? And these are open source projects that people have written, that other people just wrote, and probably in collaboration with more other people. Well, now React can be basically the same thing. You're importing visual pieces that have functionality that you can use in your project. So we're going to do exactly that for the Google Maps. So, in other words, I didn't write this map code. This is a component. This is a module that I imported from an open source directory that I'm using in this project, right? So we want to do the same thing. So let's do that. Oop, wrong project. Okay, the module is called React Google Maps. It's just an NPM. So in other words, all those NPMs we were doing earlier, it's the same thing. We go back to our directory, cd to the root level, and we do npm install React Google Maps. And now we have the React Google Maps component library. Pretty cool. Good? Yep. So this is the one we just installed. Okay? So we also need the actual, yep.
I'm still like on the last piece. It's not showing any of the text on it. It was showing it when it was just like this is the React app. But
Check your terminal. Check your webpack. Your webpack crashing the webpack. Oh, sorry, your webpack in your terminal. Check your webpack over here. Go to the webpack window.
You guys get that running?
Cancel that.
It's right here.
Control C. Control C. Not Command C. Control C. And do webpack. Dash W.
Install this, right? And then you just run that, and it'll
Okay,
get all
webpack
this
is
webpack stuff all set up.
run the page again.
Okay, so I don't have to do npm install /. You can just run this command first. That's when you start. This is just like a start one. What I do,
Yeah,
I call it Google Maps instead. are you already good to go? You're like following along, right?
No, not good.
Does yours render on this one?
So here, type of, if you use capital P,
So I like that.
This isn't the way you're creating the boilerplate. Okay.
Okay, one small thing about the React Google Maps is you need to install the Google Maps JavaScript library, which is just a JavaScript import from their CDN. So you're all gonna use mine, just because we don't have to go through the process of registering for API keys and whatnot. So we're all gonna use mine, and just copy and paste that into your HTML. So I'm thinking the best way to do this. I'm gonna put it on the meetup page. So here, if you go to the meetup page, there is the JavaScript link for the React Google Maps. So just literally copy everything from here to here. Okay, because we need to import the maps functionality from Google so that we can literally render the map. And then we just copy and paste that inside of our index HTML, inside the head tag. All right, Meetup cut this off. You see this here? Meetup cut this off. So we want to copy that. And paste it here, like that. Meetup still cut it off. Damn it, Meetup. All right.
For some reason, I see the whole thing.
Yeah, mine's fine.
Oh, okay, great. No problem then. Even better. So. This is how it should look, like that. Excuse me, like that. It should look like that. You got all this?
Actually, it's got, I got Bootstrap.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have script tag.
We have Bootstrap. We do have Bootstrap.
Yep, that's because I posted the wrong one. That's my fault. Try this again. You gotta be kidding me. It's not letting me post, so let me think of a different way to do this. Alright, we're gonna do what we did last time. I'm just gonna email everyone one at a time. So, what's your name?
Austin.
Austin. Okay. Austin or Austin?
Austin Jones.
Austin.
John Sigmund.
John what?
Sigmund, S-I-G.
Supreme.
If you put it in like JS bin, you could just share the link.
JSPen.
Yeah.
But I still need everyone's email, don't I?
No, then we can all just type it in.
Let's do that, because this is gonna take a while. JSPen.com?
JSpin.com, yeah. And then you can just copy it and paste it in your HTML on the left.
Thank you.
Sure. Share. So it should just be that JSPN.com/VAX
Everyone try that. Okay, so you copy that. Thank you, by the way. You copy that and you put it inside the head tag, and that'll give us access to the Google Library Maps library of functions, which we need to run the React component. So we have that now. Okay, so everyone good? So go back to your app.js. We want to set up a div tag. We're going to put the map inside the div tag. We basically have to create some room for the map is what we're doing right now. We're creating some space for the map to show up. And inside the div tag, we want to give it a style property, say width of 300 and height of 600. So I'm going to create a rectangular box for the map, 300 by 600. And just so I can be sure that's working, I'm going to give it a background color of red. That way I can be positive that, I see a big red box there. I'm positive that's working. Okay. So if you reload the page, we're hoping to see that. So grab all that code, and that's what we're hoping to see, that big red rectangle. Like that? To the right, like that. Okay. So we're just creating some room for the map. That's all we've done. Okay? Everyone got that?
When did you put the map library that you just copied?
Oh, inside the HTML, right here in the head tag. By the way, if you're going to do this on your own at home, again, at some point, you're going to try to reuse this code. This is my access key, right? So I would ask that you sign up on your own at some point. I didn't want to do that today because we would lose a half hour just to that. So this is my access token. Please just sign up on your own. It's free, but just so you know. So, everyone good? Okay, so let's start building out the map component. So remember, the map component right here is going to basically leverage the React Google Maps library that we imported a few minutes back. So we have to start importing modules and submodules from that library, right? So otherwise, we can't use it. So here, on line 2, I'm importing pieces of the React Google Maps library. This curly brace notation here is how you import submodules from a library.
Could you repeat that line? Did you just say what you just said?
So these curly braces right here, part of ES6, one of the new features of ES6, is you don't have to import an entire library. You can import submodules from the library. So here, we don't have to import all of React Google Maps. We can just import pieces. And these are literally components, by the way. These are visual components. We're going to render these like our own components. Does that make sense? So that's actually a lot. These two are visual components, Google Map and Marker. They're literally visual pieces. Marker, I think you can figure out. Those are the pins that drop. And Google Map is literally the Google Map. This is called the container component. Well, I'm not going to get into that today, but this is basically what renders these two components. Okay, so we're importing pieces from the library that we installed a few minutes ago, right? So that's what's cool about React. We can import component like libraries and use pieces from their library visually. That's a cool part about React.
Guessing that helps with performance also.
In what sense?
Important on these what you call it?
Oh yeah, that's why. Yeah, so you don't have to import the entire thing.
Getting an error target containers on DOM.
Yeah, so what that means is here in your index.html, it's looking for this and it can't find it. That's what that means. It's looking for a root container, the ID equals app, and it can't find it. Or inside the app.js, there's a mismatch between what this is looking for and what's on the HTML. Then there's a typo somewhere. Pretty much 99.9% of mistakes boil down to typos. If you have any programming background, you probably know that by now. If it was working and it's crashing, typo, I guarantee it. Just find it. There's no other way. Yeah.
My question is on that same topic of performance. Like, since with the Google Map or the React Google Maps, for example, since that's not in our development section, that's actually, we're saving that in. When it's actually building, isn't it going to take the entirety of the library anyway, as opposed to?
Yes. So when we deploy the app to a server, we're not going to get there today, but if this was deployed live, when you deploy it to a server, we don't deploy all the libraries. In fact, we deploy none of the libraries, even the ones in the regular dependencies. They get installed on the server through what's called a build script. So they'll be installed, but they won't be used. Until we actually import it here.
Okay.
So it's kind of like they're in the file directory, kind of, and we use whatever pieces we want. In ES5, here you just couldn't do that. You have to import the entire thing, and then reference each one from the overall library. So if you did React tutorials in the past, by past I mean like maybe 6 months ago, you may have seen something like this: React create class, right? And here, this is ES5 React. We have to import the entire React library, and then utilize a method off that library. We're still doing that anyway here, but we only need the component right here. Okay, so I'm going to cheat a little bit because I already wrote a lot of this code. So the next thing we have to do is we have to create what's called a container for the map right here. All we're saying here is that we want the map to occupy the entire contents of its parent, 100 by 100. And then the next thing is going to be a fair amount of code. So
Wait, could you go back with this?
yeah, we'll be back there in a second. I'm just going to copy and paste. Sorry?
Put that in the bin too.
Oh, this part right here?
The code you left.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. We'll do that. That worked for everyone, right? The JS bin?
Yeah.
We'll do that then. It's a good tip. So I'm going to get rid of this because we're done with this, right? This is just to confirm that it worked. We're not going to actually show this, right? So we want to get rid of that. Here's the code I'm replacing it with. And don't copy this. Just listen to me for a few minutes so you can kind of absorb what's going on here. So the Google Map Loader is it's what processes the map. It loads. It does exactly what it sounds like. It loads the map. The actual visual component is right here, Google Map. Okay. Here we're using the map container variable we define up here, basically saying we want the map to occupy the entire content. So if you make this 50%, I'm sure you can figure out what's going to happen. All right, I'll just cut it in half. So that's the container element, right? That's pretty self-explanatory. This part right here, I'm going to just leave this out, honestly, because it's not going to, we don't need it right now. But these params, you can probably figure out as well. Default zoom, right? The zoom level. Where do you want the zoom to start out at? And the higher the number, the further out, right? I think. We can figure that out pretty easily. Default center, this prop center, those are lat long coordinates, right? This right here will not work because this property doesn't exist yet. So what that means is what we have to do is we have to pass down a center, a lat long coordinates to this entire component in order for this to work. We're going to do that in a second. And also right here, on drag n, we don't need that either. So here, just a couple config options. Street view, control, just you can set these to true, and then you have street view and whatnot. So the initial configuration is this. Most of it you can parse out and figure out what does what. Does that make sense? So one thing we have to do is pass down a center property from the parent component to the child component. Make sense? So we're all going to do that right now, and then I'm going to put this in the JS bin. Okay? So the parent component is right here. Remember, this is the child component. This guy needs a property called center. So what we want to do is we want to create a variable called center right here. And the center has to have a lat and a long. Lat, long. And the map component that we have right here is going to receive that center as a property called center. It's a little bit confusing, but I'm going to make this a little bit less confusing by calling this location. So it's not, I don't want people to be confused by this. You see the process here? We have a location variable, and we're passing that as the center property for the map. Okay? So in doing so, this property right here is now fulfilled. It now has a center to begin with. That's what we just did right here. We fulfilled that value. Okay? Before we actually render that, a couple things. This location, I don't know if you know where 0, 0 is, but it's in the middle of the ocean, so that's not very useful. So I'm going to put in New York City. So grab as much of this as you can. This is right around Times Square. So that's going to be our default center. And as per your suggestion, I'm going to toss this in JS bin. So I can use the same one, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't have to like create a new link or anything like that.
Yeah.
Is that it?
No, I guess you can clone your own. Yeah. I guess if you had it open, you'd still be able to edit it. But
Not a problem. And then I share it again, right?
yeah.
All right, grab that one. York City. Good.
So we put that inside the return. Return.
Oh yes, yeah, right here, just like this. So right away, you can see how React makes it pretty cool to build components that can be reused in other projects. Right, that's pretty cool. Right, so trying to figure this out from the bottom up, although it's probably a very worthwhile exercise. If you need to get a project out quickly, you want to defer to the expertise of others. So yeah,
I'm in the ocean. What's the longest?
right there.
So the way that if you made a component like this one and you gave it to someone they were going to use it, they would like attach it to some DOM element, or like how they're doing here, how it's saying, oh, this is a map container. Oh, like the container.
Yeah, this map component right here is pretty agnostic, meaning that we could just pass this off to another project. As long as you remember, it has to have a center property.
Okay. So we wouldn't have to do the element, the container element. We could just like stick it in.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you could even just do this literally raw inside the app.js component. It'll work just fine. That's not best practice though. You're tying in too much code there, because in a typical project, you might want to reuse the map in other pages. So by putting this code in the app.js raw, you preclude the ability to do that. So now you'd have to just reuse, you'd have to copy and paste that on other pages, and that's poor form. So here, this sort of analysis comes with experience. Like you want to build your projects as modular as possible. So here, on the project I'm using as a demo, look, I got the map showing up twice, right? But these are both the same components, just rendered in different sizes, right? So what I did, because after having done enough projects, you realize you want to build things in modular fashion as possible. I built literally the component we're building right now, a map component, which I can just stick in anywhere else, rather than copying and pasting it over and over again. And that's what we're doing right now. All right, so now we're actually making some progress. Yep.
Okay, so the React Google Maps. I don't know how to phrase my question. I have a phrase my question, actually.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Where were we? Okay, one more
Show
thing.
the app.js.
Yep. Okay, so how are we doing so far? So again, just to reiterate, if you guys want to learn React, if your goal is to become a React developer, you really want to do this like at a higher level. When you go home, all that setup stuff we did for the first 20, 30 minutes, just do it again a million times. Because like I was saying, that shouldn't be the challenge, right? So the only way you can get by that is by doing it a million times. So one thing I like to say a lot in these demos is that people have the notion that somehow I have a sort of a preternatural ability for this. I am gifted. I am not. I'm not gifted. The amount of repetition I do is obscene. That's the only way I can put it. Today I coded for about 8 hours, and that's just my day every day, right? So that's how you get good at quite literally anything. You can't be bad. Like if you're doing that much coding, right? these demos I do twice a week. I've been doing it since February. So it just becomes rote nature now, right? So you got to get past that so you can get to the real challenge. So this, for me, required a little bit of thought this morning. I have to piece together the organization. I'm like, how am I going to put this over here? Where's the proper spot for this? You want to waste your brain cycles on that. Right? You only get so many brain cycles a day. I don't know if you've done a lot of coding, but if you have, you probably observe like I have. After a certain number of hours, you kind of burn out. For me, that number is maybe around 5 or 6. Everyone has their own tolerance, but for me, it's around 5 or 6, and then that's it. So if I'm burning brain cycles for 3 hours on just how to get Webpack config working, I can't get to the good stuff, right? So that's the whole point of, that's the whole like foundation of my philosophy. That's you gotta get past all that, and then get to the good stuff. So who has this working? Okay, decent enough ratio. We'll go with that for now. So next thing I want to do is get a marker on the screen so we have the map like fully doing what we want it to do, and then we're gonna consume a REST API to get some real data. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do, create a markers array. And this is going to be an array of pins with location. Okay, so we're going to have an array of one object. We're going to render one marker for now. And that marker is going to be the same as the original location. Okay, this is an array. I don't know if you here to here. It's an array. So we're going to pass that as a property called markers to the map. The map markers goes into here. So now the map component has another property called markers, which we're not using yet, but it has it. Let me make sure my Webpack isn't crashing. A good habit when you're doing React development is just to check in on Webpack every so often. And you should always be seeing these green lines. Over time, you're going to develop that habit no matter what, because you'll be making so many mistakes. You'll be checking out on Webpack out of just sheer paranoia, and then that habit will just build in. You'll just be checking out on Webpack. Yeah.
I'm not using Webpack right now. I'm just using the Independent Spark. I'm not gonna run into problems later on.
That will cause problems. Yeah, you want to use Webpack. I'll show you how to use it after we're done today. Okay, so we have an array of one marker. Okay, so let's get that guy showing up on the map. So okay. So here, this isn't too much code, so I'm going to ask you to type this. What I'm doing here from lines 8 to 19 is I'm going through the markers property. This is called a map iteration. So this word map right here is a different type of map. This means go through the array. Okay, so I'm going through the array, and for each venue inside the array, I'm creating a marker variable with a position key, and I'm grabbing the lat and the long from the location object. Remember, I put in a location key inside the original marker that has a lat and a long. This is why. Okay, and I'm going to make a small adjustment here. Instead of venue.id, I'm just going to call that I. I'll explain that later. So what we're doing is we're preparing a list of markers for the map to show. That's what we're doing here. So the Google Maps can show as many markers as you want. You have to tell it how many you want. And furthermore, you have to specify what the location is. Otherwise, it won't know where to put the marker. Does that make sense? And right now, I'm just picking the original location, which means if this is accurate, we should see a pin right in the middle of the map when we load the page. What's going on here again is I'm accessing a property called markers. So remember in the parent component, I passed down a property called markers. I now have that property in usage right here. I'm iterating through it. That's the map function. I'm iterating through that array. And for every element in the array, I'm creating a marker variable with a position key so that Google Maps knows literally where to put the marker. And then I'm returning a marker component right here. This is pretty important. You see where it says marker right here? That's the component from the React Google Maps. So here, this is a visual result. Right here. This is a visual piece of code. This is kind of like HTML. Okay, so we just created a bunch of markers, or in this case, just one. However, this map won't show it until we insert the markers inside the params. So inside this list of params, we now have another parameter we have to add for the markers. Which is done like that. So this variable right here is a reference to that right there on line 8. This line right here, line 8, that variable is being used right there. Okay, that's the connection. This is definitely a good time to check in on Webpack. So my Webpack is not complaining, which means so far so good. But obviously the ultimate verdict is load the map, and I hope to see a pin right in the middle. So let me double check that on my own right now, so that if I did make a mistake, I'm not leading you down the wrong path. There it is, right in the middle, just like we expected. So go ahead and make sure you have that.
My map isn't working.
Okay, check in on Webpack. Yes, you have a Webpack crash. So what that means is you want to learn how to read this. So it says map.js, line 6, it's saying something's going wrong in that. So get used to that recommendation. It's very helpful.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so who here has that pin showing up? Good. So what that means is our map is now really ready to consume some real data. We're setting it up with a bunch of static data, which is great. I mean, obviously it's not very robust, but it's all working, which means now we're ready to start using some real data, either from our own backend or an API like Foursquare or Yelp or whatever. So that's where the real fun begins. So we want to get our map ready to show some real data, which it now is. Good. Yeah.
Line number 17, what is the ... marker?
Oh, that just means we're passing off. This is a property. This is the shorthand way of passing off a property called marker. That's all. So it's a shorthand notation. Okay, so who has this going? So we're going to use the Foursquare API to fetch a list of places given a location coordinate, a GPS coordinate, and returning a list of places nearby, coffee places, pizza places, things like that. Again, we're using my API key. So if you're going to go home and do this, please register your own API key. It's not a big deal if you don't, but just don't go crazy with mine if you're going to use mine. So let me find it. So I'll put this guy in the JS bin as well. This time I didn't take it out, so I can just do that now, right?
Yep.
All right, cool. So I put it in the same link. Tell me if that works. So you want to grab that link, copy that, and paste it in the browser. Okay. And that's not going to work because I forgot to remove the Latin long. So if you take a look at the URL that I just sent you, if you look closely where it says LL equals Latin long, you guys see that? That's where the Latin long obviously go, right? So let's use our current Latin long, 40.7 whatever. So we get rid of the lat long. And we insert our actual values for Midtown Manhattan. Like that. You see that? I just inserted some the actual hard-coded values we have in our project. And this is my API key, so again, just go home and register your own. And then put that in the browser, and you should get some data back. Here's some actual data now. Okay. If you don't have that working, I'll just use JSPin again. So I put it in JSPin, so I don't want to waste too much time with that. Now here's an API call from Foursquare for a bunch of places near Midtown Manhattan, just random places. So what they call venues. Okay. Okay. So first things first, we gotta get this working in a browser. So make sure you have your API requests successfully rendering in a browser, because we're going to do this inside the React code soon, but you can't until you get it working in a browser. Yep.
Where did you put the link that you just sent?
JSPin. So here, if you go on the meetup, if you click on this link right here.
In the code, where did you put that?
Oh, I didn't. I put it in the browser.
Oh.
And we just want to see all this raw JSON. So all I'm doing here is I'm confirming that the API request is even valid. Is anyone here not familiar with APIs? Has anyone here not worked with APIs before? So pretty basic API request. This is a pretty standard JSON response. Okay, so this is what's going to provide us our data. Right? This is going to give us our list of places to show on the map. Now, for the record, in my project, that's not the case. In my project, this is all coming from my own backend. I have my own persistence here. And I have my own geospatial queries making all this work. So I'm not using any APIs here for this data. It's all being stored on my backend. So maybe we could even just use mine. So here's my API request from my project. And you see how they all have lat long coordinates? Right? So that's what supports the Google Maps. Okay, so here's the Foursquare API. Everyone got that working? Good. So now let's punch that into our project and get our project using that. So now the question is, how do you make an API request inside of a React project? So what's that? I'm not going to use fetch, although that's a perfectly good library. I'm going to use what's called super agent. So we're going to use another module that makes API requests for us. There are a bunch of modules that are pretty popular. Fetch is certainly one of them. Axiom is another one. I like to use what's called super agent. So another one is request. There's a handful of libraries that you just see coming up over and over again. I'm a big fan of super agent, so we're going to use that. So go back to your console, your terminal, and let's do another npm install. Npm install super agent. So super agent is going to make the API request on our behalf. Okay. Go to your app.js, and inside the app component, the parent component, we're going to override what's called the lifecycle method called component did mount. And then right now, all we're going to do in component did mount is a console log. A lifecycle method is a method that gets fired by the system, not by a user or any user-invoked action. So in other words, when this component shows up, this function will just automatically trigger. And we can do whatever we want inside of it, or we can ignore it. It's up to us. But we can override it and provide and insert our own actions if we choose to do so, which we're about to do. So right now, if I reload the page, the home page, but before I reload it, you want to do the following. You want to hit Option Command I and click on the console. This is where all your output is going to go. So you reload the page, and we should see this happen right here. Component did mount. Okay? That means we have successfully overridden the lifecycle method. And again, notice it has nothing to do with a user-invoked action. It just happened. That's the important thing. It just happened. So make sure you see this right here. That's the goal. So, yep. And right here is the code that does it. So now that this lifecycle method has been successfully triggered, or at least registered, we can insert our own action. In here is where we're going to make the API call the Foursquare and get a bunch of GPS places by GPS coordinates. Okay. So again, we need super agent for that, which means we need to import super agent. So import super agent. So spell it right. There we go. Okay, so super agent is going to make an API call to the Foursquare service and then return the data. And once that comes back, we're going to use that data. You guys good? So let's do that. So super agent. Super agent uses what's called promises to run its requests. This is what a promise looks like. Basically, right now we're running 4 functions, 1, 2, 3, 4, in what appears to be chronological sequence. That's fundamentally what they are. I'm not going to get into the nuances of promises, but this is what promise syntax looks like. We're basically chaining 4 functions onto the other. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So inside the first function, the get function, we have to insert the URL. That's what we copied from Foursquare. So I'm going to make a variable here called URL, and we paste the Foursquare URL. It is .n, thank you. Okay, so we passed the URL variable into the first function, the get. We ignore the query for now. Normally we wouldn't, but for now we're going to ignore it. Inside this next function, we're setting what's called headers. All of this is sort of formalities. This guy right here is what matters the most, the end. That's where we take the response and do what we want with the response. Okay? So in the response, for now, we're just going to console log the response. Which is really the body is what we want. That's where the main information is. So right away, once the document, the component loads, or what they call mounts, right? Component did mount. As soon as the component mounts, we fire off an API request so that we have an initial set of data. Okay, that's what we're doing here. So now we want to reload the page to make sure that that works. Keep the console open because this is where the output is, right? So if I reload the page, look at what I get down here. All this JSON, that's the same Foursquare output we were looking at a minute ago over here. It's literally the same JSON. Okay? It's hard to read it down here because there's just a big jumble of text. That's why we keep the browser version open. And here, we have to parse the JSON down to what we want. There's a response key and then a venues key. That's what we want. The venues is the payload. That's the information we really want. But we have to pick out the parse, the response key, and then the venues key. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. So what we do here is we do const venues equals response body response again venues. Right there. Okay, definitely worth console logging this right here so we can make sure we parse this guy out right here. A lot of people struggle with parsing JSON initially. Once you do it a lot, you just get used to it, but sometimes it's a little bit hard to see where all the keys and values are, so it takes a little bit of getting used to. But here, if I reload the home page, I should still see a big pile of JSON show up here, which I do, which is a good sign. But all those other keys are gone, like response and venues. So here we only have an array of venues, which is exactly what we want. So now we're making a successful request to Foursquare, and we're getting an initial package of data. That gives us basically stuff to work with. The next thing we want to do is get all these venues showing up as a list right here. Okay? So we can see a bunch of names of restaurants and hotels and whatever right here. Right? Because don't forget, this is supposed to be for like a user, right? Like, this is not very user friendly, right? So here, everyone with me so far? What we want to do now is swing over to the other component, the places component, and set that guy up to show the list of venues as just a list of strings, just a bunch of names. So we swing over to the places component. We don't need this anymore. This is the places component because we're done with that. And above the render, above the return, excuse me, we want to have a list. This props venues map. And then we're going to map through return So right here is the key missing link. You see venue.name? How do I even know I can do that? Well, the answer is I don't. What you want to do is you want to go to the browser response from Foursquare. This is why you always hit the API in the browser first, so it's easy to read. Okay, so I'm going to do that real quick. If you look at the browser response, you'll see that each venue inside the venues array has a name property. So by virtue of that, I'm accessing that property inside the React code. So that's not like, I didn't make that up. Like I'm reading the API response. and I'm deducing what keys and values I have as options. Good. And then here, inside the actual return of the component, I'm going to return that list of venues as an ordered list. So who can tell me at this point what I need to do to make this work in the app.js?
Go to the parent app.js and then pass it as a prop.
Yeah, we need a property called venues. Otherwise, this whole loop will break down. It'll have nothing to loop through, right? So just like we did with the maps, we assign some properties. We do the same thing here. We assigned a property to the places component in the app.js. Before I do that, does everyone have this code?
Where did you get that link from?
Which one?
The API.
Oh, it's in. I put it in the JS bin. So if you go to the meetup page, you click on this. It's in there. Yeah.
I've got all the code. It's still not showing on the map. It says error cannot find module dot component dot slash component slash map.
That means there's typically a typo in the map.
What's the email?
We'll check your Webpack too. If the Webpack is crashing, it'll try to fault your
Webpack will show us.
Yeah, so Webpack is still crashing. So run Webpack again, and it'll crash again, and try to read the line number and see where it's breaking down. So this won't work yet. Keep that in mind. Right? Don't test yet, because this is not going to work until we do what? Correct. We have to pass in the property, right? So here, the question is, how do we do that? We have the venues here, right? Right here in the componented mount. The question is, how do we get it down here, right? We can't just write venues because that's beyond the scope, right? The scope won't be passed all the way through. It just won't even know what it means to do that. So what we have to do right now is set it in what's called the state. The state inside of each component is what we use to store values. That's one of the things we use to store values. So here, I have to declare the state. So let's do that right now. Did I spell that right? Instructor. Super. So here on lines 8 through 13, I'm setting up the state, and here's where I can store values. Okay? So the values I'm going to store is venues, which is going to be at first an empty array because on the initial load we don't have any venues. We don't have venues until we get the API return. Okay? Now what's good is that this state is maintained throughout the entire component. We can use that anywhere. So it doesn't matter if it's beyond the scope of the function. So everyone got that? It's going to scroll off screen in a few seconds. So what we want to do is pass off this array of venues to the places component from the state reference. So down here in the places, right here, I call the venues, right? So venues equals this dot state dot venues, like that, and that passes it off from point A to point B. But this still won't work yet. If I load the page, and it shouldn't crash, but I don't see anything here. Okay, that's because right here, when the API returned, I didn't reset the state. Does that make sense? So I have to reset the state right here. This set state. Then I reset the state. with the values from the API. So that's the key distinction here. This is the first point at which we're actually using API results in our React code.
Because it's async.
Sorry?
Because it's async. The
Async.
response of the API call is
Asynchronous.
Yeah, this whole thing is asynchronous. That's correct.
That's what it is.
So here, yeah, it works for you, but not for me. That's not good. All right, let me figure this out. Okay, my Webpack isn't broken.
Problem was I was missing an equal sign after style. Just style and then.
But you found it.
Yeah, it was style. I missed the equal sign after style.
Happens everyone, but it's a good thing you found it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what I'm doing wrong here.
Did you scroll down?
Yeah, it's mine. My
It's
list.
below it. It's below the
is,
map.
It's below the map.
I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so it was working the whole time. All right.
So,
Did you go to the places.js?
Places.js. Okay, so we're almost there now. We have data from Foursquare where it's rendering successfully on the places component. Now let's get that last step where it's actually showing up as a series of pins on the map. App.js. Now, if you look closely at the markers array right here, it has one object with a key called location. That's not a coincidence. That's because when I prepared this demo this morning, looking through the API from Foursquare, they all have a location object with a lat and long. So, in other words, we've already prepared the markers array in accordance with the Foursquare JSON formatting. In other words, there's very little we need to do to configure the markers. In fact, there's nothing we need to do. We can just take this out, and we can do this.state.venues, because each one of those venues has a location key with a lat and a long. So I kind of cheated there. Like I set it up for. I kind of set it up for you without telling you I was setting it up for you. Does that make sense?
So we just deleted the markers on variable?
Because our venues are effectively markers. If you think about it, what are our markers? It's the venues. Look at all those pins. So that little move I pulled there was to make this last step quick and easy.
When I take out the markers, the markers variable, it just breaks after that.
Yeah, don't forget to update it here as well. So the whole gist of what I was trying to say here is that the venues we get from Foursquare are effectively markers. Those are de facto markers. And what I'm saying is that when I set it up earlier with the markers array over here, the JSON inside that array was pre-formatted to match this JSON. I was cheating. I already knew the format. So I made it match so that when we got to this point, it's just a quick swap one in out for the other. That was to make sure that this doesn't like break down for everyone. Yep. Who here has all this working? You should see a big mishmash of pins when you load the page. A couple things here. Well, let's try this right now. The zoom level is not quite appropriate for this. Right, it's a little bit too far out. So try to get the zoom a little bit closer. And if you recall where that happened in the maps component, try and do that. Number one. Number two, when you go home, explore this component a little bit more and see if you can figure out how to make it so that when you move the map, it requeries the API and then reloads a set of pins over here. That's a good assignment, yeah? We're not going to do that today because we're out of time, but that's something good to work on. That's a good exercise, okay? And then if you can get past that, another good thing is see if you can load these pins using your own pin graphics. Right, we're using the default right now. Right, but this is not the default. These are not defaults. Right, I'm using my own graphics here. See if you can figure that out. And then if you get that far, see if you can get it so that the pin drops. You see how it drops? So if you go, all these things you can just sort of play around with. Okay? So forth and so on. If you get that working, try this. If you click on this right here, if I click on this apartment right here, look at the right side. Up and down. So it tells you which one you just clicked on. Right? All these little things you want to try and figure out. This is how you learn programming. You just try and figure out what works and what doesn't.
Are we going to render the right side or just on that?
No, we're done today. I just wanted to get the Foursquare and the maps and the pins and whatnot showing. But these are things you should try and do when you go home. These are, if you want to keep on working on this, these are worthwhile things to try and put together. I'm sorry, one more time, who had this working? That's a great ratio. Good.
I just don't have the multiple markers.
Okay. Cool. Couple things. So today we went through what I would consider fairly typical class, except it was faster. I would say it's about 50% faster than a typical class. Just for the sake of time, I have to get through as much as I could. The way I teach is exactly this. I just do, and then you guys follow. I explain. This is it. You learn by doing. That's how I learn. That's how my students learn. That's it. I don't get bogged down in the theory. Focusing on the context and this, and like literally. I don't know if you know JavaScript, but the whole this context issue is a tough one to understand. And when do you bind to context? When do you not? Not to say that's not important. It's obviously important. But the way I learn these things is by going through it a million times, and then it sort of sinks in through osmosis for me at least. And that's how I got better at programming. My whole thing is very simple, just repetition. That's it. I said I'm not an athlete, but I did play sports in high school, and my basketball coach just made me drill my lefty dribble 10 hours a day. Just do it over and over and over again, or you're not going to make the team. That's it. That's how I learned coding. I think the reason why I do it that way is because I didn't start coding as a kid. I'm in my 30s. I'm 31 years old. Right? I started programming when I was 25, 6 years ago. Right? So what that means is I was a couple years out of college when I started programming. So I was way behind, or at least I felt I was behind. Does that make sense? So the only way I knew how to learn was that, just repetition. I didn't know anything else. I didn't have the upbringing where I was making a computer when I was 12. I didn't have that. Nothing against that. It was too late for me. I didn't grow up that way. However, I think it gave me certain advantages in that if you did grow up that way, obviously it's good, but you don't learn the way I learned, which is massive amounts of repetition. That's the way I learned. That's the way I learned math. That's the way I learned whatever sports I played. That's the way I learned anything. So I applied that here, and it works. It works, I promise. And that's how I do my teaching. that's basically it. I've been coding professionally for about 4 years now. I'm very, very happy I made that decision with my life. I was a high school math teacher before that for 2 years. That was my first job out of college. Terrible experience, and so I decided that this is not the future I want. So yeah, I don't know how many people in this room were CS majors in college. Okay, so you guys kind of have a jump on people like me. So I didn't study CS in college. I studied economics, right? So I was an econ major. CS did not begin for me until 2 years after college. That's way behind in CS world. So I like 10 years behind, right? I was 25, 26, and there were a bunch of 15-year-olds who can kick my ass, right? So I had to like really buckle down, and that's what I did, right? So, it took me about a year and a half or so before I got anywhere near what I would consider skilled, but I certainly wasn't good. I needed a couple years to get good. I would say I needed about 3 years to get to what I considered good. But now that I've been doing it professionally for a handful of years now, at least from a professional context, I couldn't be happier. I love what I do here. This is a lot of fun. So that this was something that I'm very happy, a decision I made with my professional career, that I get to just come up with ideas like this, and literally in 5 days I build it, and then watch no one use it, and then I sell it as a course, right? But the fun happens in building it. That is fun, right? That's an enjoyable experience. And if people use it, great. If not, well then I'll just build another one in 2 weeks. And that's kind of what I'm doing right now. The app I'm working on right now, it's a football prediction app where you can basically make predictions on all the football games, college and football, every week, and you can build up a track record. And if your track record is good, you can sell your predictions. I'm a big football guy, so maybe people will use that. Maybe not. We'll see. Here's the point, though. I can go from idea to reality in a couple of weeks and not waste months and tens of thousands of dollars, which is what a lot of my clients used to do, building an idea that no one's going to use. That's where people really come undone, especially in the startup world. They have this idea with zero validation. They think it's awesome. Maybe it is awesome, but there's no market for it. And they waste lots of time and money, investor money, building it, and only to find that no one uses it. We're talking like 6, 8, 9 months, not 6, 8, 9 weeks, right? So at that point, you're looking at like upwards of a year is gone, right? Right. And I don't have that kind of time anymore, right? I'm not a high school kid. I'm not a college kid. Like I need to move faster. So for me, is this going to go anywhere? Probably not. But no harm, no foul. I only lost 2 weeks. Not a big deal. I mean, I needed about 5 full days, but there were many days in between where I just didn't even work on it because I was doing other stuff. So that's a lot of fun. That to me is an enjoyable experience, and that's why I went into this, right? That's why I left teaching, because teaching was just the same thing every day, and I got bored with that. How many people here aspire to be a professional programmer? That's the goal? Okay, cool. So we're all trying to get to the same place. I think that's good. I love it. I love what I do. This is coming from a consultant point of view, meaning I'm a contractor. I never worked full-time for a company. I always contracted because I just enjoy that life better, just the freedom and the flexibility. And if I want to, I can start a new company like this and give it a shot. If it doesn't work out, I can go back to consulting, right? Because that'll always be there as long as I keep my skills up. So when I started out, I was doing Objective-C, because that's how you program iOS. That's long in my rearview mirror. I don't do that anymore. I don't even really do that much iOS anymore. But that's how I became a programmer. That's how I broke in. Now this is my bread and butter. React, Redux, React Router. Until the next big thing in a couple of years, right? So you got to sort of be ready for that. You have to understand that that's part of the deal, and it took me about 2 years before I sort of accepted, like, okay, this is just the way it's going to be. So just keep up with it. Keep up. Cool. Yeah. So that's my backstory. What's coming up? I'm doing a weekend crash course at the end of this month, October 28th, 29th, and 30th. That's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's basically a hackathon where I'm going to, for 3 days, I'm going to go through literally this entire project from top to bottom, from scratch. Literally this. I'm just going to rebuild Perk in front of everyone, 8 hours a day. Everything. I will start from zero and build the whole thing in front of you. And if you can follow, awesome. If not, just sit back and watch. That's coming up on the 28th, 29th, and 30th. That's $1,200, $300 deposit. I'm doing the long-term courses again starting next year. January 9th is when I'm doing Node and React. We run 2 varieties of that. We run an evening boot camp. That's 24 weeks, 3 nights a week. That's going on right now. We're on week 3. I'm also doing a full-time boot camp, the conventional full-time 12-week, 40 hours a week. I'm starting that on January. I got a couple good people on my team. I'm very excited about he couldn't make it tonight. It's unfortunate, but Roger, he's one of my lead devs. He is a professional React developer. He's a React/Node developer at Shutterstock. So that's nothing to sneeze at. So that's Roger right there, this handsome guy. So I say that because he's going to listen to this video soon. So, and this is Anna. She's one of my TAs. She went to Grace Hopper Academy. So, and I am looking for more good lead devs. So if you know anyone who does React and Node at a professional level, point those people in my direction. They're hard to find. So I'm fortunate to find some good people like this. And yeah, those are my offerings coming up. Let me know if you're interested in that. And that's basically it. Do you have any questions? Anything with the material you want to see again? Anything? Yep. Let me just shut off the video.